How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we study Daf Yud Ches, Daf 18 of Masechta Nazir. Friends, today we talk about Nazirs. Okay, so we're going to start on Daf Yud Ches Amud Aleph, 10 or 12 lines into the page. First word on the line is Man Tana. Hadutana Rabbanan, yo. Let's do it. Man Tana Hadutana Rabbanan. Who's the author of the Brisa? Who's the author of the following Brisa? Ein bein tamei shenozar. Okay, there's no difference between a fellow who is impure at the time that he declares his Nazirus, the Nazir tar shenitma, and a Nazir who's pure, who's not tamei, who becomes tamei. Ela shetamei shenozar shvi shelo olo min haminyan. That that somebody who was tamei at the time that he declared his intent to embark on a 30-day Nazir experience? Whatever. The guy is tamei and he says he's going to be a Nazir. So then day 7 of his purification process could already count towards his Nazirus. Whereas a fellow who's a Nazir and is pure but then becomes tamei, Ein shvi shelo ole lo min haminyan. When he then becomes pure, day 7 does not count. Right, so you have a regular Nazir who's tar, he becomes tamei. Now he goes through the 7-day purification process. So ein shvi shelo ole lo min haminyan. So day 7 of the purification process does not count towards his Nazirus, only starting from day 8. So Rav Chizde Rebbe. So Rav Chizde says that Brisa is Rebbe, the Amar Rebbe, Ein Nazirus Taire Chala Ela Ad Shmini. That the Nazirus, the counting of the Nazirus after, right, once he's Tahor, that only begins on day 8. Titem Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yidoli, if you say it's Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, Ha'am Nazirus the Taire Mishvi Hu Dechayla. Because Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda would say that already from day 7, the Nazir would be able to start counting, right? So in a situation where you have a Nazir who's Tahor, and then he becomes Tameh, now he goes through a 7-day purification process. According to Rebbe, he can only start counting towards his Nazirus on day 8, whereas according to Yosef Bar Yehuda, he can already start counting towards his Nazirus from day 7, and therefore, he can already start counting from day 7, and therefore the Brisa which says that a Nazir Tahor, Shenitma, he can only start counting the day after 7 on day 8, that must be like Rebbe. My Rebbe, Umay Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda, no. So tell me, we just said that Rebbe's opinion is that he counts from day 8, Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda said he counts from day 7. No, tell me, how do we know this? We're making it up out of thin air. The Tanya is learning the Brisa, V'kidash es Rosho Bayom Hahu, that it says by a Nazir who became Tameh, in describing the korbanos that he offers on the 8th day. So, right, so meaning, so he becomes, so he's a Nazir, he's Tameh, he becomes Tahor 7 days, then on day 8 he brings korbanos. It says V'kidash es Rosho Bayom Hahu, and I guess he'll be a Nazir on that day. Bayom Havas korbanos of the Rebbe. So Rebbe says, yeah, on that day, the day that he is offering his korbanos, on that day he starts counting towards his Nazirus. Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda Omer b'yom tiglachtoi. Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda says, no, you count already not from the 8th day, but from the 7th day already you can count. The day that he gets his haircut, day 7. V'odetnan, that which we learn in a Mishnah. Nazir shenitma tumos harbe. Para. A Nazir who became Tameh, and then he became Tameh Nochamol. And Umevi al Korban Echad, he only brings one Korban. Man Tana. Who is this Tana? Who is this one who teaches that that you can have a Nazir who becomes Tameh multiple separate Tum'as, and yet he brings one sacrifice for both Tum'as? Rav Chizda Yosef Bar Yehuda, Rav Chizda says the author of that Brisa, of that Mishnah, is Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda. The Amar Nazirus Taire Mishvi'i Chayla. Now Rabbi Yosef ben Yehuda says that if you have a Nazir Tomei who becomes Tahor, so already from day 7 he can begin counting towards his Nazirus. So Umishkachas Lo Kigon, and the situation where he has multiple tumas and he brings one sacrifice for both, Shenitma Bashvi'i, it means that he was a Nazir, he became Tomei. And then already on day 7 he could start counting towards his Nazirus again. Now he can't yet bring his Korban until the next day, until day 8. But on day 7 already he becomes Tomei Nachamo. So it's a separate Nazir, a separate Tumah. He was already Tomei for 7 days. And then on day 7 already he could start counting again towards his Nazirus. But punct on that day he becomes Tomei Nachamo. So it's multiple tumas, and yet you're going to bring one set of Nazir Tamei korbans for both tumas, because at the time that he became Tamei Nachamo, he was unable yet to bring his korban. Right, the korbanos are only from day 8. He became Tamei on day 7. Right, so meaning he was a Nazir. He became Tamei on day 7 of his purification process. He's already able to start counting towards his Nazirus again, but punct on that day, he becomes Tamei Nachamo. Now on that day that we're talking about, day 7, he was unable yet to bring his Korban. That would only be the next day on day 8, but by then he's already Tamei Nachamo. So then when he becomes Tahor from the second Tumah, and it's time for him to bring a Korban, he could just bring one set of Korbanos for both Tumahs. That it became Tamei on day 7, and then he became Tamei Nachamo. Right, on day 7 he becomes Tamei Nachamo. Kevon de lo yatsa sha'aruya lahavi korban, and since he became Tamei on day 7, which was not yet a time when he was able to bring a korban, because that would be on day 8, eno chayev ela korban echad. Therefore, he's only chayav one korban for both tumas. The one set of korbanos, right? Ola sa'of, chatas of, ola sa'of, and an oshum. Ditema Rebbe, because if you're going to say that it's Rebbe who says that he can only start counting towards Nazirus on day 8, which is already when it's shaykh for his korban, well then, if he would become Tamei on day 7, right? You have a Nazir who is Tamei, and now it's day 7 of his purification process, and he becomes Tamei Nachamo. Kula Tuma Arichti. According to Rebbe, he's not, right. It's still all the same Tumah. It's not like he's able to start counting towards his Nazirus yet, anyways, until the next day, until day 8, and then he became Tamei on day 7. He became Tamei. He's just extending the initial Tumah. It wouldn't be we're not talking, that wouldn't be two separate Tumahs. It's one long Tumah according to Rebbe if he becomes Tamei on day 7. V'dinitba bashmini, and if he becomes Tamei on day 8, because of v'nitba bashmini, if we're talking about where he becomes Tamei on day 8, but on day 8, right, so I mean, if you have a Nazir and he becomes Tamei, and then on day 8 of the purification process, i.e., the day that he would be bringing his Korbanos, he becomes Tamei Nachamo, and day 8 is when he would start counting again towards Nazirus, and on that day he becomes Tamei, but because he was already able to bring Korbanos on that day, so then he would have to already bring two separate Korbanos, right? Meaning since he became Tamei on day 8, which was when he was already able to bring Korbanos for that initial Tumah, so therefore now when he becomes Tamei again, and now he has to wait another 7 days, and then on day 8 of that he has to bring Korbanos. It's going to be separate Korbanos. He's going to have to bring 2 rounds of Korbanos for the first Tumah as well as for the second Tumah. That was pretty gishmak, I think. So okay, so we're saying that brisa which says that if you can have 2 Tumahs and bring 1 set of Korbanos, that must be Rabbi Yosef ben Yehuda, who says that he becomes Tamei on day 7 when he was already able to start counting for his Nazirus again, but was unable yet to bring his Korbanos until the next day. My time of the Rebbe. How come Rebbe says that he can only start counting from day 8 towards his Nazirus? Or my krav chiper olav me'asher choto ala nefesh, that'll bring korbanos. V'hadar v'kidashes rosho, and then he will start going back to being a Nazir. So we see that counting towards your Nazirus is connected to bring the korbanos. Bring the korbanos is on day 8. So memele, he starts counting towards the Nazirus on day 8. For Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, whereas Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda argues, Im kain lemakra v'kidash es rosho, it should simply say v'kidash es rosho by Yomahu Lomali, right? Meaning, if it would just say v'chipar ala me'ashachot ala nefesh v'kidash es rosho, so I would know b'meila. Okay, so on the day that he brings his korbanos, he starts counting towards his nazirus. By Yomahu Lomali, why do I need to say by Yomahu? What's by Yomahu teaching me? If it's not teaching me about day 8, because I would already know that without Bayomahu, Tneu Inyan La Shvi'i. So it says Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda must be teaching that already from day 7 he would be able to start counting towards his Nazirus. Rebbe Nami Oksiv Bayomahu. What does Rebbe do with Bayomahu? Omar Loch Rebbe Hahu La'achnu De'asa Lo Malacha Afapish Lo'evi Korban, that he could start counting towards his Nazirus even if he hasn't yet offered his korbanos. Even if he hasn't yet offered his korbanos on day 8, he could already start counting towards his Nazirus. Alright? Fine. Rav Chizda my duchke le'ukme kirib Yossi Bar Yehuda. Woo! Gewaldig. This is where do we have this Gemara? Where do we have this Gemara? In Ksubis? Chagiga? No. Chagiga. Would you look at that? Chagiga. Wow, look at that. Chagiga. Ooh, Chagiga. Okay, we're going to Chagiga. Rav Chizda, my duchke lukma Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, lukma kigon, the nitma, go slow. What are we talking about? Talking about the Mishnah. The Mishnah had said that you can have this guy, this Nazir, becomes Tameh twice, and yet he brings one set of korbanos for both tumas. Now, we had said that has to be Memele Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, because in order for it to have two separate tumas and one set of korbanos, it would have to be Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, who says that on day 7 already he could start counting for his Nazirus, but then he becomes Tameh again, so it's two separate tumas, but he wouldn't yet be able to offer the korban on day 7, so therefore, when he's done with the second tumah, he just brings one set of korbanos for all of it. Says Rav Chizda, maybe you could say that Mishnah can even be Rebbe. Ho. Rav Chizda, my duchke lukme Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda lukma kigon. Why does he have to say that Mishnah is like Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda? Say that it's talking about the nitma, the chazya beleil shmini. Ho. That it becomes Tomei Nochamo on the night of the 8th day, the night between day 7 and day 8. Ho. That you have a Nazir, and he becomes Tameh for 7 days, and then the night between day 7 and day 8, which is already technically day 8, but he can't bring his korbanos yet until day 8, right? He can't bring his korbanos till the next day, but it's technically already day 8. He becomes Tameh on that day. He becomes Tameh that night. So you could say, V'Rebbe, and you could say that it's Rebbe, because it's already day 8, so he could already start counting towards his Nazir. So when he becomes Tameh Nochamo, it's a separate Tumah. And yet, because he couldn't yet bring his Korbanos, because you don't bring Korbanos till the morning, he wouldn't, it wouldn't yet be a time when he could bring his Korbanos. Therefore, there's no it's not a good way to explain it. If it was already a time when he could bring his korbanos for the first tumas, then we'd have to bring 2 sets of korbanos, right? Like we learned earlier. But we're going to say that because he became tamei in that night in between, so it was technically already the 8th day because it was the night of the 8th day. So it's already the next day. It's already the 8th. So therefore, it's a separate tumah. But because he wasn't yet able to bring his korbanos, because you can't bring korbanos till the next morning, so then it's not considered like there was korbanos yet for the first tumah. Therefore, at the end of the second tumah, he brings one set of korbanos for all of it. I hope that makes sense. Fine. Midelo mukim laki Rebbe. And from the fact that Rav Chisda does not say that it's Rebbe, so what does that mean? It means Lema kasavar laila lav mechuser zman hu. Come on, Chagiga. That there's a shaila of when you're only able to bring the korbanos on day 8, but not the night, leading up to day 8, right? Which is technically already day 8, right? Then the day starts in the night. But we say that you can't bring the korbanos till the day. So is it because nighttime is not yet the time for the korban? The time for the korban is during the day, not at night? Or is it that the night is already the time for the korban, but we just push it off until the morning, but technically the night is already the time for the korban? Now from the fact, so if we say, from the fact that Rav Chisda does not establish the Mishnah like Rebbe, it must be because Rav Chisda holds that according to Rebbe, or it must be because according to Rebbe, the nighttime is already the time for the korban. And therefore, if he becomes tummy that night, technically it's already the time for the korban, just that we don't bring it till the next day, but it's technically already the time for the korban. If he becomes tummy at that time, he would already have to bring 2 sets of korbanos when he becomes tahor ultimately. Right, so therefore, le'miksaver lelia lav mechuser zmanhu. The nighttime is not considered the wrong time. It's the right time already, but we just don't, right, but we push it off till the next morning. And therefore, since already the nighttime is technically the right time already, if he becomes tummy at night, you have to bring 2 sets of korbanos. Omer Rav Adabar Hava Habeha Talia says, Rav Adabar Hava, look, I mean, it's not, they go hand in hand, meaning, we wanted to say that if Rebbe were to hold that Laila Mechuser Zmani, if Rebbe were to hold that, or maybe it's Taka of Chisda, one second. Maybe Taka is saying that Rav Chisda holds Laila Lav Mechuser Zmanu. Okay, because if you would say that the night of the 8th is not yet the time for the korban, the time for the korban is the next day, not at night, well then you would be able to say, well, you can establish the Mishnah even like Rebbe, that because he became Tameh on that night, which is already day 8, so therefore it would count as a separate Tumah, yet because it's not yet time for the korban, so therefore he wouldn't yet be chayiv in a korban, and therefore he would bring 1 set of korbanos at the end of the second tumah for all of it. Right? That's what we wanted to say. Meaning, if you could say that the nighttime is not yet the time for the korban, then you can make the distinction and say that it's a separate tumah, but it's not yet chayiv in korbanos. But comes Rav Adabar Hava and say no such thing. You can't make such a distinction. If you're saying that nighttime is not yet the time for the korban, well then emas mechze the korban the tzafra. So when do you bring when is the time for the korban? The next morning. Naziris nami lo chayla tzafra, but the Naziris also doesn't kick in. You can't start counting the Naziris also until the morning, right? So if you say that the time of the korban is the next morning, so then you also can't start counting the Naziris till the next morning. And if you're going to say that technically speaking you could already offer the korbanos at night, well then Naziris tari chayla meorta, well then at that point you can also count the Naziris from the night. But you can't have it that you'd already be able to start counting Naziris from night, but also say that it's not yet the time to offer korbanos. No, if you could start counting Naziris from night, it means it's also time to offer the korbanos. And if it's not time to offer korbanos, then it's also that you can't count the Naziris yet. Okay, that's very nice. Says the Gemara Gufa. We had said earlier, Nidma Bashvi. If a fellow becomes Tameh on day 7, Nidma Bashvi. Okay, so if he was a Nazir and he became Tameh, then on the 7th day of his purification, he becomes Tameh Nachamo. Enu maybe ala korban echod. So he brings 1 korban for both tumas. Nitma bashmini, because of nitma bashmini. If he became Tameh on day 8, well then maybe korban al kol echad ve'echad. So then he brings 2 sets of korbanos for each of his respective tumas. Maschil amona miyad and divrei Rabbi Eliezer. And since Rabbi Eliezer can already start counting immediately, right? Even if he didn't yet offer his korbanos, he can already start counting immediately. He doesn't have to, right? He doesn't have to wait till he offers his korbanos in order to start counting his naziris. Comes the 8th day, could immediately start counting towards his naziris. V'chacham omim, say the chachamim, korban echad al hakol, and the chachamim say korban echad ad al hakol ad sheyavi chataso. Oh, whereas the chachamim say nisht. Meaning, whereas according to Rabbi Eliezer, if he becomes Tameh on day 8, so then already he's going to be chayiv 2 sets of korbanos, right? So if you have, according to Rabbi Eliezer, if you have a Nazir who became Tameh, and then on day 8 of his purification process, he becomes Tameh again, even if he has not yet offered any of his korbanos, still, at the end of his second round of Tumah, he would have to bring 2 sets of korbanos. Whereas the Chachamim say, no. The Chachamim say, if you have a Nazir who becomes Tameh, and then on day 8 of being pure, he becomes Tameh again, but he has not yet offered his korban chatas yet. So since he has not yet offered his korban chatas when he became tameh for a second time, at the end of his second tumah, or his second purification process, he only brings 1 set of korbanos. Even though he became tameh on day 8, when it was already a time when he could have offered his korbanos, nonetheless, since he didn't offer any korbanos, and he became Tameh again, so after his second purification process, he brings 1 set of korbanos, right? Right? Korban echad al hakol. He brings 1 set of korbanos for both tumas ad sheyavi chataso, until he brings his korban chatos. Right? Meaning, if on day 8 of the first purification process he had offered his korban chatos, so at that point, then if he became Tameh, he would bring 2 sets of korbanos. But as long as he didn't bring his korban chatas, he would only bring 1 set of korbanos after the second purification. Hevi chataso v'nitma. Okay, hevi chataso v'nitma. Now, if on day 8 he had offered his korban chatas and then he became tameh, maybe korban al kol echad ve'echad. So then he brings a korban for each tumah respectively. And if he brings, right, once he offers his chatos, that's already enough for it to be considered a separate tumah. Even though he hasn't yet brought his korban asham, that's okay. Once he brings his korban chatos, he can already start counting towards his naziris. Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka Omer, says Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, kshem shechatosu ikavto, kein ashamu ikavto. That says Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, no, he would, on day 8, he would have to bring his chatas and his asham in order for it to be considered a separate tumah, in order for him to start counting the naziris again, and in order for him to be chayiv for 2 sets of korbanos. Bishlam Rabbi Eliezer. So now the Gemara says, I understand Rabbi Eliezer's opinion on my krov kidashes rosho bayomahu. The pasuk says, and he'll become a tameh on that day, on day 8. On that day, even regardless of what korbanos he offered, on that day he becomes tar. Right? He starts counting his naziris. The rabbis say no. When it says ahu, it means even if he didn't yet bring his korban asham, but he brought his korban chatas, okay, so then he starts counting his naziris. But you have to at least offer his korban chatas. But what does Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka do with ahu? Because he says that you not only have to bring your korban chatas, but you also have to bring your korban asham. So what's ahu excluding? Well, even though he didn't offer his ola yet, right? So he's got to offer his chatas off. he's got to offer his asham, but he didn't yet offer his ola. He could already start counting towards his nazirus. Rabbanan ola lo bayim yuta, whereas the rabbis say ola doesn't need to be excluded because, at the end of the day, dorin be'alma hu. At the end of the day, it's really just a gift, so you don't really need it to be excluded. So who is going to exclude the asham? De Rabbanan. What is the reason for the rabbis? The Tana is learning the price of Israel. Hashem is min Israel vevi keves ben shnasu la'asham. Okay, that v'hizir Hashem is min Israel vehevi keves ben shnasu la'asham. Will bring a sacrifice for an asham. Matamalom lefisha matzinu shekol hashamu shebatorah she'ima'akvin. Now, in general, when you have to bring a korban asham, you have to bring the korban asham. So is it possible that also when it comes to the Nazir who became Tameh and now he becomes Tahor, is it possible that if he doesn't bring his asham, then that he has to bring his asham in order for him to start counting his Nazirus again? Even though he didn't yet offer his korban asham, v'hizir could already start being a Nazir. Again, Rabbi Shmuel ben Osho, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, Omer, says Rabbi Shmuel ben Osho, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, v'hizir v'hevi, a masa hizir, is manchevi. When can he go back to start counting his Nazirus? When he has offered his korban asham. He would have to bring his korban chatas and his korban asham, and until then he cannot continue counting his Nazirus. Yo, what do you say we go like a shtickle further? And let's go shtickle further, just wrap up the union. Who is the author of the following brisa? Isha shenadra benazir. If you have a woman who said she's going to be a nazira, v'nitmeah, and then she became tmeah, v'acharka chefer la baila, and then her husband is made for the neder nazirus. Okay? Mevia chatas ha'of ve'enim via olas ha'of. So she has to bring a chatas ha'of, but not in olas ha'of. Not in olas ha'of. Okay, so you have a woman who says that she's going to be a nazira, and then she becomes tameus. Now she's got to bring her korbanos tuma, but then her husband finds out about it and he's made for the neder. So she brings the chatas ha'of, but not the olas ha'of. So Amar of Chizar Bishmal, it must be Rabbi Shmuel. It must be Rabbi Shmuel, because if it was the rabbis had said that the Ola is just a Doron Ba'alma, it's just a gift, so you may as well bring it anyways. So from the fact that you don't give it means that it's inherently part of the Korban, like Rabbi Shmuel ben Osho, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka had said, and therefore, when the husband is made for the Neder, Nazirus, so then she doesn't have to bring the Ola Sof anymore. Mike Sover. So now, what's pshat over here? How does he understand the nature of the husband being mefer the neder? If you're going to say that the husband, when he's mefer the neder nazirus, he's mamish mefer it retroactively chatas of nami lo leisi, well then she shouldn't have to bring any korbanos, even the chatas of. The iksaver ba megas gayis olos of nami leisi. And if you say that the husband can only be mefer from this point on, well then, she already became Tmeya, so then she should have to bring the Ola Sof as well as an Osha. So really holds that the husband, retroactively gets rid of the Neder Nazirus. Rabbi Shmuel Savrla Rabbi Lazar Akaper, and Rabbi Shmuel holds like Rabbi Lazar Akaper. The Tanya, as we learn in a brisa, Rabbi Lazar Akaper, Bribi Omer says Rabbi Lazar Akaper. Bribi just means like, an honor. It's like a lashon of kavod. What does it mean when you have a Nazir who becomes Tameh? It says in that context that you atone for him because he sinned on a soul. What soul did he sin against? Well, the sin that he did was that he deprived himself of wine. If this fellow who only restricted himself from consuming wine, and he's called a sinner. A fellow who fasts and restricts himself from all things, well, certainly that's going to be a problem. So we see that a Nazir is called a sinner for depriving themselves of these pleasures. But this is specifically by a Nazir Tame. We're saying that even a Nazir Tahor would be considered a sinner. Rabbi Lazar Akaper holds that a Nazir Tahor would also be a sinner. The reason why this whole thing about sinning for a soul is written in the context of a Nazir Tameh is because a Nazir Tameh now has to do it all over again, right? Not only did he deprive himself once, he now became Tameh, he has to start all over again. He's going to deprive himself a second time. That's why the sin is written in the context of the of a Tameh Nazir, but really it applies to all Nazirs, and that explains why even if the husband is mefer the neder the mafreya, nonetheless she would still bring a chatas off because she deprived herself of wine, and that's why she brings the chatas off nonetheless. Well, friends, that was daf. What daf was that? 18 of Masechta Nazir. We learned a lot of stuff today. We learned about the machlokas between Rebbe and Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda about a Nazir Tahor who became Tameh, and now he's Tahor again. Does he resume his Nazirus from day 8, or from, like Rebbe says, or from day 7, like Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda says? And we then had this Mishnah, which we said is like Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, which is that you can have a fellow who becomes Tameh multiple times. It brings one set of korbanos for all of it. We got into the sugya that we had seen in Chagiga about if Laila Lav Mechusers Manu or Laila Mechusers Manu, right? Do we consider, right, when you bring a korban on day 8 and not on the night prior, is it because the night prior is not yet time for the korban b'chlal, or maybe it is already time for the korban, but we just wait till the next day? And we saw the machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer, the Rabbanon, and Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, that Rabbi Eliezer says already on day 8, and Memele he starts counting his Nazirus, even if he hasn't yet offered his korbanos. The Rabbanon would say no, he would have to offer his korban chatas in order to start counting Nachamo. And Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka says not just the chatas, but oichet the osham as well. And at the end of the daf, we saw the famous opinion of Rabbi Lazar Akaper, who says that a Nazir is considered a sinner for depriving himself or herself from wine. Friends, that was the Yud Ches of Masechta Nazir. I hope you enjoyed. Peace out.